Welcome to this edition of Security and Compliance Weekly. We are joined today by Doug Landoll, who's going to be leading our discussion on CMMC, or the cybersecurity maturity model something certification. Yeah, let's go with that. Cybersecurity maturity model certification. We look forward to an interesting and in-depth discussion today. So join us as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly.
Welcome to episode number 75 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded today, June 8th, 2021. I am your host, Scott Casper Lyons, and with me today are my gregarious co-hosts, Mr. Josh Quadling Marpet and Mr. Frederick Flea Lee. Welcome, gentlemen. Unfortunately, Mr. Jeff Mann is on vacation and will not be joining us today, but we hope he's listening in. So, do you want to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly? Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher or YouTube channel. Sign up for our mailing list, join our Discord server, and follow us on our newest live streaming platform, Twitch. Security Weekly is ecstatic to announce that Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person. Woohoo! This December 5th to the 8th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista in Orlando. Call for presentations and early registration for Security Weekly listeners is now open. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to submit your presentation and register for the early registration price before it expires. Now, with that out of the way, a little bit about our guest today. Doug Landoll has over 3 decades, not years, of information security experience and is a best-selling cybersecurity author. He has led security risk assessments and established security programs for top corporations and government agencies. His area of expertise lies in security risk assessment, security risk management, security criteria, and building corporate security programs, as well as the author of 3 cybersecurity books. Doug joins us today to share his thoughts, concerns, and solutions involving the implementation of the CMMC framework within the federal government procurement process. Doug, this is where I turn it over to you. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. The CMMC is what you're going to need to become familiar with if you want to do business with the DoD in any cybersecurity contract. And it may expand beyond the DoD into other areas of the federal government. So it's absolutely essential for hundreds of thousands of organizations that make their living doing cybersecurity services and IT services and other things that touch sensitive information. So extremely important.
Okay. So before we open it up to the other gentlemen that are here, we have a hot seat question that we like to ask all of our guests. And it goes a little something like this. Where do you stand on the security versus compliance spectrum?
Compliance is just an element. Privacy is a concern. Availability is a concern. Compliance does not make you secure. Secure does not make you compliant. So I see them as certainly one does not contain the other. However, it makes a lot of sense to be compliant depending on your industry. But at the end of the day, it's a business decision, and how much is non-compliance going to cost you?
That's interesting. Gentlemen, would you like to jump in here?
Yeah, I have just a quick question, and it's going to be a longer answer. And I was just wondering if maybe, Doug, if you can actually help us just walk through some of the history of the CMMC, which is clearly a mouthful.
Yeah, I like to say, when someone asks me what is the CMMC and what's new, it depends on how much time they have to talk about it. But the answer is nothing and lots. Nothing is new in the CMMC in that it's almost all the same base requirements that have been there since 2010, 2013. So since any of the NIST 800, 171, or even 853 release 4, there's really no surprising requirements in there. A couple of exceptions. For the longer answer, there's lots changed. No longer, the key ones, no longer can organizations self-assess. Now, that shouldn't be much of a difference on paper. A requirement that you attest to is the same requirement that some outside organization comes in and assesses you against. So the requirement hasn't changed, but someone holding your feet to the fire, making sure you actually implement it, that's huge. There are some additional controls outside of the NIST frameworks, and I think that's certainly new. And then there's the whole framework and the whole ecosystem, and all of that is still being worked out. So what's new this month can be some of the questions there.
So in the industry, I've heard terms of CMMC being thrown around. Well, it's a sprinkle of this, a little bit of that. Is there any way to sit back and say, well, we take a bit of 172 and some ISO and some NIST, and we sprinkle it all over with some GDPR? And can you help demystify a lot of that?
Yeah, almost all of it. I don't know what the percentage is. Maybe it's 90%, but a lot of it is 800, 171, and 172 as well, which are just some additional assessment controls. There is a sprinkling of stuff. Now, it's interesting. If you read some of the early guidance, and maybe even some of the other guidance I've seen out there, they say it comes from New Zealand, and it comes from ISO, and it comes from all these other things. That's nonsense. I don't think it does.
It doesn't.
Some of those other areas might actually have similar controls, but it is limited to the NIST documents that we've talked about. CIS 7.1 should be and NIST CSF, and then there's a few additional controls that are labeled quote CMMC, which just means they saw a gap where these older requirements didn't meet something and they changed it. They added things. No attribution to exactly where it came from. But those are the three additional ones besides the NIST family.
Now, one of our co-hosts, Josh, has been working on CMMC and working with CMMC for a while. Josh, can you break down what your involvement has been and help expand on what Doug's saying?
Sure. Happy to, as a matter of fact. So I've been on the working groups with CMMC for about the last year and mumble. We wrote my working groups that I've been on. We wrote the provisional assessor exam. We wrote the learning objectives for the certified professional, for the certified assessor 1, certified assessor 3. Those are the levels of CMMC that you're allowed to assess. If you're a CA1, you can assess level 1. If you're a CA3, you can assess level 1, 2, and 3, and so forth. Eventually, we'll write the CA5, which is the one that can assess any level, but they don't even exist yet.
Right. Now, the ones and the twos are reserved mainly for people that are mowing the lawn, refilling soda machines, doing that sort of stuff versus the fives. What makes a 5 different from a 1?
So, okay, that's a great question. So the big difference is the caliber of information that they handle and the amount of information that they handle. If you're handling federal contract information, hey, I've got a contract to mow a lawn, and as a part of that, I have a map of the base. There's nothing even unclassified. It's just basic information, part of my contract. That's a 1 or a 2. If you're handling controlled unclassified information, CUI, some people call it CUI, I refuse to, then you're a 3, 4, or 5. And if you're handling monstrous amounts of it and starting to get towards the classified levels, if you will, that's the 4s and 5s. That's the highest levels. The DoD has put out figures that and Jim is asking what the difference between a 1 and a 5. It's the amount and type of information, Jim. There you go. So the DoD has stated that there's about 300,000 companies that are contractors that are going to be under CMMC over the next 5 years. and only about 30,000 of them are 3s, 4s, and 5s. 270,000 1s and 2s. It's a lot.
I can't believe I'm making this reference, but since Jeff is not here, Josh, the way you described it, it really does. It sounds almost PCI-like with regards to actually the levels, meaning your levels are determined by the amount of data and the sensitivity of that data itself, which I think is interesting that there is kind of like that parallel in the federal space and the commercial space. And I just wanted to hear the bell ding for somebody saying PCI also. I am a little bit curious.
I want to let our guest answer that question, because that's a great question, Flea. But let's have our guest answer that question.
I don't find the relationship with PCI with that. I think PCI, it's either cardholder data or it's not. Every single person who has cardholder data must adhere to all of the PCI requirements. There's some exceptions in terms of how you store it, and et cetera. But levels don't really go up. As you have more and more transactions, you have to have an external assessment, and you can't self-assess. And I don't see that same thing here with CMMC. Nobody can self-assess.
Wait. Hold on.
No,
so
Doug,
you're
Doug
saying
has great points.
You're saying that like this is connected to PCI? I mean, wait, what?
No, he's saying it isn't connected to PCI. That it isn't. PCI is a binary situation. You either have cardholder data or you don't. Whereas with CMMC, it's FCI, CU, federal contract information, controlled unclassified information, etc. But I think that there is a connection to PCI in that, and Doug, you can absolutely disagree with me, in that the philosophy of it is that the scoping, the idea of where the problem is, or not the problem, but where the controlled areas are, is around data. Yes, data. It's data. It's data driven. Data driven. Yeah. I mean, Doug, would you agree or disagree with that?
I think, Josh, you have more information in that you've probably seen the scoping guidance that's about to come out.
I have not. The scoping guidance has not come out even to us in the web groups.
I would like the scoping guidance to be close to the scoping guidance that PCI puts out, so that we have some clear ways to define the enclaves of where is your data. But I would agree, it is a data-centric criteria like PCI is, and the controls need to be applied where those controls protect the data. And I would agree with that.
Now, let's taking a step back here in the conversation for a second. You were talking about outside assessors. Is there an outside assessor requirement to CMMC, and how do you find that outside assessor?
Yeah, so you can find the outside assessor on the CMMC AB marketplace. They are not available yet. They're coming, and Josh, you'd probably know more about the timeline since you're writing some of those. No,
Doug, please. I love. Come on, don't worry about it. Keep going, man. I love discussing it with people. Different viewpoints are awesome. Let's do it, man.
So I think the most important thing here is it's outside assessors, right? Like I said before, the news thing here is no longer can you just attest that, there's a bunch of requirements the federal government's making me do. I do that, check the box, right? Or under the DoD assessment method, which is what is applying right now, you have to self-assess and put a score and put that up there in a website. That will go away when CMMC is in full force, and only a third-party assessor can review your implementation of the controls.
Now, is that self-assessment reminiscent of 171 or what? Because as those who are involved in U.S. federal contracting know that 171 really didn't have any teeth to it. That's why they came out with 171 Bravo and then rebranded it to 172. So how are we getting around that?
So 172, which was 171B, is the current DoD assessment method, which includes the self-reporting. We're moving away from that as the CMMC rolls in. So the date is the projected date. By the end of 2025, all DoD contracts will require a CMMC certification for the person to bid on this. In the meantime, no one is requiring it today outside of any pilots. So we have this kind of sliding bar where a certain percentage of them next year, the year after, et cetera, will start requiring this until 2025 when it's everybody.
So is that starting in October? The reason that I pointed it directly at October is because that's the beginning of the next fiscal cycle for the government.
Every year there will be more organizations in the DoD that select some contracts that say this contract we're requiring CMC certification.
Okay, so is that sort of like saying set asides, or is that just blanket across the board?
I don't know if there's any every agency has to do X percent. I think it's more of a volunteer basis, or which agency feels that they need the CMC framework to assist with the security posture of their contractors.
Okay, so a prime is going to have this, and then their subs are going to have this, and then their subs of subs, if that's allowed by the contracting officer. How is that going to get passed down? Is that sort of like a clearance paperwork getting passed down, or is that hard and fast requirement style?
Yeah, it's basically hard and fast requirement. In anyone who's going to be handling this information in their system is going to have to be certified. So I would say that's a complete flow down to subs of subs, et cetera. Everyone's going to have to do that.
So in dealing with all of these compliance regulations that companies currently have to meet for doing government work, whether it's handling controlled unclassified or classified information, what do you see as the biggest pain points for companies, and how can we start to navigate what those pain points are going to look like?
Yeah, I think the biggest pain point is going to be just a realization of this is actually the requirement and we really mean it. You can read through a requirement and kind of judge, yeah, we probably do that and check a box. But when you know an auditor is coming and they're going to want to look at evidence, it's a different story. Nothing changed in the requirement, but we just start to understand it's going to be a little more difficult.
Okay.
For example, for anyone out there who has been an assessor or been assessed, this probably sounds familiar. I ask an organization, do you have a account management process? Do you have a way to figure out who's going to get an account, what kind of rights they'll have, what groups they're part of, who approves it, when we're going to change those rights, et cetera, right? That's account management. Most organizations, if I just ask that, will say, yeah, we have a process. And then I'll say, is that process followed? And they'll say, yeah, it's followed. But if I ask them, do you have a formal process? Is it documented? And can you show me the evidence of that process being implemented? Then they kind of do a timeout and say, well, we don't really have a process. Just Bill implements it. The requirement hasn't changed. It's only the scrutiny of what you're saying you've done has changed. And
so
I think
in a sense, we're adding, and I'm sorry to cut you off here, but
no worries.
To really like sum all that up, we're making cyber more complex.
Gosh, I think we're making it more compliant, and I think we're actually implementing the controls that have always been there. I don't think it's more complex. I think every organization has account management processes, backup procedures, et cetera. If you haven't implemented them yet and you're chasing contracts that require you to implement them formally, you need to do so.
So as soon as it comes, go ahead, Philippe.
Oh no, I was going to say, what I'm hearing, instead of complexity, it sounds almost like this is pushing for additional rigor and polish. I've totally been there, Doug. Yep, there's just this dude named Bill, and Bill does access and account management for us. But it sounds like what CMMC is looking for is, essentially adding rigor to Bill and documentation that, Bill is the person that does this. This is what Bill does, and making that polish. Is that an accurate understanding?
I certainly think that's accurate. Absolutely. So when we document things, they become more more rigorous, but they also become more understandable. We're able to continuously improve them, and we're able to assess where the gaps might be so we can bring to bear additional controls to make the security posture more secure. So I'm a big fan, personally, of process and process improvement. Right? If you don't write it down, you probably don't do it consistently. And one of the major ways that holes are introduced in organizations is inconsistent application of controls. So I'm personally a big fan of that. Also, CMMC is as well, as is nearly every compliance framework out there.
I'm kind of curious, Doug, like with this new push and the certifications actually being rolled out, one of the things that I immediately think of is, like, are there going to be enough assessors? Like, if I'm a contractor, or even more so if I'm a supplier to another supplier, and maybe I'm a tiny shop, how do I even get access to assessors, and how can I do that in time to actually meet the contractual obligations?
I think you've hit on one of those areas. I think is going to be uncovered is going to be extremely difficult. And I know the CMMC AB understands the difficulty, so they're pushing this out as quickly as possible. But the cybersecurity profession is negative unemployment. We don't have enough people in the entire industry on either side, let alone the assessment side. And then when you narrow that even more to people who want to be assessors, people who are qualified to be assessors, and people who have gone through the process, and then people who are still available. I think that will be a difficult thing to solve.
I'm kind of curious. It's something you actually touched on. What are the prerequisites to be even qualified to even start going down the path of actually being an assessor? And are there people that we already have in the industry that this is going to be an easy path for? Are there people that aren't in the industry yet that could potentially, jump in here as well, become assessors?
I think if you really want to be an assessor, I don't think the hurdles are too high. There's fees, there is background checks, there is U.S. citizenship, and also U.S. companies that you have to be part of, and there's training. Anyone who is in the business or even wants to be in the business, I don't think any of those things are an incredible obstacle. However, I think people will be making business decisions. As for me, I don't ever want to become an assessor. I've been there, done that. It's interesting work. I would rather prepare an organization for an assessment. One, there's more work to be had in the preparation than there is in the assessment. I think it is less competition in that area as well. And I don't feel that others are setting my prices or telling me exactly how I have to perform my work. And just personally for me, I don't plan on becoming an assessor. I plan on helping people get ready. So I think it will be a difficult bucket to fill with enough people that want to be assessors to meet the entire need of the 300,000 people in the defense industrial base.
So now, is this CMMC, is this being targeted directly at DoD people only, or is there a broader sense here? And the reason that I'm asking this is because right now, there are a lot of compliance regimes for companies to follow to be able to do business with. And there's no real clear guidance on, you need this for this, this for this, this for this. So you may have people that have to do HIPAA, but sign up for cyber insurance doing PCI. Now, instead of HIPAA, they have to do CMMC. Like, how do we demystify a lot of this and uncloak the way forward for businesses to be able to be compliant while being secure?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I mean, if you're selling to the DoD, you're familiar with the CMMC, and you're going to have to be compliant with it. And that's just the bottom line. If you're selling to other organizations in the federal government, they may be adopting it. We've heard things about, maybe the FAA or maybe some other ones. But I think you you need to be aware of what your target base is looking for. I don't know of any official announcements that other organizations outside the DoD have adopted this, but that's DoD is absolutely the driver here.
So recently, for those of you who have been paying attention to what's coming down from the Office of the President, there was recently an executive order that dealt with SBOMs and dealt with the way the DIB handles security. How does CMMC play into that EO? Even though it wasn't named per se in the EO, how does it play into it?
Well, the EO is going to drive investment, and it might drive extra requirements. Too early to say so far, but I think we'll be looking first for a review of the EO and what the CMMC already addresses. And if it addresses, I think mostly ransomware and some other attacks like that, we might see it push out to the other agencies and maybe be forced to be pushed out, or some version of the CMMC. General Services Administration, I would look to them. I would look to the Department of Homeland Security, and I would look to other departments in Department of Commerce to start adopting this.
Okay. So you think the Department of Commerce, I mean, who do you think the next few departments that are going to be bringing it on, mandating it, bringing it into their procurement system, if you will?
Yeah, I've heard that the GSA, because there was the STARS 3 contract in July of 2020 mentioned the CMMC, and I think the DHS is just a natural almost extension of, gee, if it's DoD first, who's next, right?
Yeah, and
I mentioned Department of Commerce because, geez, that's where NIST is.
Yeah, but I mean, they can do their own thing for quite a while.
That's true.
So I will tell you, I've heard a couple of rumors that I can't repeat about various agencies. I haven't heard anything about OMB. The one thing I'll say is, for anybody that's not Govy focused, is if OMB gets their hands on it, it's immediately government wide, as I understand it, because they handle all the overall procurement contracting. So GSA and OMB, especially if both of those say yes, it's done. It's government wide. Yeah. What about internationally?
Yeah,
what about commercially here in the U.S.?
I don't see CMMC going international because the CMMC AB is all U.S. based. They have U.S. restrictions on consultants and the organizations that do the assessments. I don't see it being adopted internationally.
Okay. I will say that there has been some interest, and that there has been some people talking about it, but it's kind of casual at the moment. We'll see. How about on the commercial side?
Where have you heard that interest? Because that's an interesting statement. Where have you heard that?
I've heard that by talking to let's see. There was a group called the CMMC COE. They're no longer extant, as far as I know. I know that they lost their MOU. Their memorandum of understanding. They got several countries to sign up. As I understand it, they represented themselves as the official group for CMMC. They, as I understand it, they were not. So, but the countries were interested. So that's a whole different story. I know that Crest US and Crest UK were interested as well. I know you're familiar with Crest, Scott.
I am, and Crest has its own idiosyncratic requirements to it that blow it out of the water, and it's just you want to add another layer of complexity, start requiring businesses to be Crest compliant. Oh dear Jesus.
Well, but it's the same idea, Scott. If you need Crest compliant pen testers, and you need to have and they're certified, that means they have a not a license per se, but they have a certification that you can remove if they perform malfeasance or bad things. If you're required to be compliant with a certified compliance, certified this, certified that, licensed this, licensed that. I've had talks, and I think you have as well, Scott, with Kevin Johnson about certifying web AppSec testers and pen testers, and licensing information security people. And in a sense, this is one way of doing that. Not necessarily the people, but if your company has to be certified by, if you have to be certified as compliant and certified as secure, and you have to be certified by certified, accredited people and groups, then at a certain point, you're effectively doing a licensure or certification system.
Listen, in my own humble opinion, most compliance certifications that are out there that are missing some sort of third-party checking or third-party validation really don't have teeth behind them. Any new compliance regime that comes out should have some way of verifying and validating that you are doing what you say you're doing, right?
Well,
yeah, I think that's an important aspect. Absolutely.
Go ahead, Josh.
It's always an issue. It's always an issue with licensure. It's always an issue with certification. You've got the group that administers the certification. You've got the tests. You've got to make sure that the tests aren't unintentionally biased. You've got to make sure that the questions are proper. I mean, you've got psychometricians. That's actually a thing. Psychometricians that have to check the test and make sure it's right. That's why, for example, if you take the CISSP exam, Scott, how long ago did you take the CISSP exam? A few years, right?
Oh, dear God, years ago. Oh, horrifying, horrifying experience.
When you took it, did they tell you that there are test questions on there that are actually test questions, not from the test, but they're testing the questions?
Yes.
Yep.
So they actually test the questions to see how people do and make sure from your demographics that it's not biased towards African Americans, Caucasians, older, younger, socioeconomic. They actually have to balance the demographics and make sure there's not unintentional bias. They also have to make sure that they're asking what they think they're asking, and the answers say what they think they're saying. So you've got a lot of issues administering any kind of test. And it's very awkward and very difficult. And I will tell you from my experience, it's caused some fascinating, I've learned a hell of a lot by writing a lot of these tests and systems. It's absolutely fascinating stuff.
Well, hold that thought, Josh. Let's save dropping into that for the next segment. We're going to go to break right now and join us. We'll be back in about 5 minutes or so, maybe less than that. And that's it.